Since the Messiah is a descendant of King David, there's a lot of archaeologists that are trying to disprove the Bible and the strength of King David's kingdom. Some are saying that he is just a little chieftain and that he was not this big king, which is a total lie if you're opposing the Bible. Now, a lot of these archaeologists are not believers in the Bible, so they don't recognize it as the Word of God and that everything in it is true. So I want to read this article in Israel 365 News that is about this Christian archaeologist out of Houston, Texas, named Dr. Scott Stripling. He's been in Israel for 20 years excavating and has found proof of King David. So the article is by Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, July 28th, 2021, and it's titled, Christian Archaeologist Proves Biblical Accuracy to Skeptical Colleagues. And good for him for just showing truth. A long-standing debate among archaeologists about the historicity of the Bible centers around whether or not David was an actual monarch ruling over a unified kingdom. A new theory seems to bolster the side in favor of King David, arguing that at the time Israel was semi-nomadic and would not leave behind archaeological remains of huge stone structures. Professor Eretz Ben Yosef of Tel Aviv University recently published an article in the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology that has challenged archaeologists who claim that the biblical account of King David is inaccurate. The new article ignited a renewed debate between two major schools of thought in biblical archaeology. In his article, Ben Yosef claims that archaeologists have an architectural bias in which bases the existence of an ancient monarchy on significant ruins. This bias has been a major aspect of the minimalist school of archaeology, which claims that King David was an insignificant character in history, more of a tribal chief than a regional monarch. As a result, the minimalist school rejects the biblical narrative that the northern and southern kingdoms united under King David, maintaining that the kingdom of Judah only began to extend its rule over the region in the 9th century BCE. They have a critical reading of the Bible, rejecting its historicity. And let me just guess right here that they reject Jesus as the Messiah of Israel too, and also a king, a great king. Traditionalists, also referred to as maximalists, claim the biblical descriptions of a complex and powerful Davidic kingdom based in Judea in the 10th century BCE are accurate. Critics of the biblical account, referred to as the minimalist school, say that King David was a much less influential character in history, and the kingdom of Judah only began to extend its rule over the region in the 9th century BCE. His studies at the dig in the copper mine in Timnah, Ben Yosef conclude that the society represented there was an early Edomite, not sedentary kingdom. If these nomads had not exchanged in mining, creating smelting camps, mine shafts, and thousands of tons of industrial waste, we wouldn't know anything about them, he says. Maybe with a specialized survey we would be able to find a few tent remnants, but at best we would still just be able to say that there were a few nomads there. We would know nothing of the sophisticated polity and society they created. Based on this precedent, Ben Yosef posted that without an architectural bias, there is ample evidence that the region was a unified kingdom 3,000 years ago under the rule of one monarch. The lack of architectural artifacts, Ben Yosef suggests, was because the population was at least partially nomadic. Despite this nomadic nature, the tribes were sophisticated, powerful, and unified. And, it kind of makes them sound like they were cavemen or something, like sophisticated cavemen. And it was the Holy Spirit through King David that prompted him to know exactly how to build the temple. And it was not a primitive building by any means whatsoever. So basically what they're trying to do ultimately is deny the Messiah, deny Jesus as the king of Judah, deny King David had any power, and that Jesus doesn't have any power because he didn't have any power. And that's just false. Both critical and conservative archaeologists think the same way. If we find a big wall, David's kingdom was big. And if we don't find a big wall, David's kingdom was very small, he says. Everyone is following the same misconception based on a huge preconception about nomads in the region who are usually compared to modern Bedouins and are seen as incapable of creating sophisticated states without settling down and building large cities. That's just simply not true about King David. He built the city of David, which was, like a peninsula on the end of where the Temple Mount is. And he built all kinds of city buildings that were sophisticated, including the temple that his son built through the plans of King David. So this is just really disgusting. Ben Yosef compares King David to Genghis Khan, the Mongolian emperor who launched the invasions that conquered most of Eurasia in the 12th century. Though Genghis Khan was unquestionably the most influential leader of his era, ruling over a substantial kingdom, there's little archaeological proof of his existence. The lesson here is not that David was like Genghis Khan, but that archaeology is not the adequate tool for studying nomadic policies. Polities, damn. The lesson here is not that David was like Genghis Khan, but that archaeology is not the adequate tool for studying nomadic polities, and we have to rely mostly on textual evidence, Ben Yosef concludes. Dr. Scott Stripling, provost at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Houston, Texas, has been sifting the sands of Israel for over 20 years. Using the Bible as a guidebook, he's now digging in Shiloh, which he surmises may be the true site of the tabernacle. Dr. Stripling found Ben Yosef's argument to be compelling. I think in Hebrew they pronounce it Shiloh. For a long time we have had this debate, Dr. Stripling said. The minimalists maintain that the historical account given to us in the Bible is not an accurate account from the time of the Exodus until the time of the United Monarchy. I do not agree with the minimalists on this point. I think we have an abundant evidence of the United Kingdom in Israel centered around the Iron One period. In archaeology, I believe, we should go from the known to the unknown. So what we know is that the Soleb hieroglyph in Nubia contains hieroglyphics from the 14th century BCE referring to Yahweh in the land of Sosa nomads. So we already have inscriptural evidence of a people believing in a deity called Yahweh in the region. We have abundant written evidence from the Iron Age. And let me just say right here, there is no W. There's no letter W in Hebrew. It would be the letter V, so it would be pronounced Yahweh. So anybody saying Yahweh is not pronouncing the name of God correctly. Dr. Stripling referred to the Tel Dan stela discovered in 1993, which dates to the 9th century BCE. The stela details that an individual killed Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, and the king of the house of David. The stela is generally accepted by scholars as genuine and a reference to the house of David. He also referred to the excavation at the city of David in Jerusalem. That is a large stone structure that Dr. Elat Mazar excavated, Dr. Stripling said. Many of us believe that there is ample evidence, a lot of from the pottery, to prove that King David actually lived there and it was indeed his palace. And even if you are unconvinced of King David's historicity, the research at Hazor, Gezer, Megiddo, and similar findings at Jerusalem certainly show that the biblical account of King Solomon was accurate. There is certainly evidence that even at that time, Israel remained semi-nomadic. There is inscriptural evidence and architectural evidence, albeit I am convinced that there is evidence that in some locations, like the dig I'm working on in Shiloh, there is lots of pottery, bones, and other evidence that there were lots of people living around the location, but few remains of dwellings. It seems clear that many people were living around the central location in tents, making it much larger than it would appear if we were only going by the architecture. Ben Yosef was approaching this anthropologically and sociologically, taking what he learned in Timnah of that era and extrapolating it to other areas. Well, that is what we do as archaeologists. We find parallels, we have hypotheses, and we test them. Ben Yosef is advancing the discussion and should be credited. He seems to be largely correct. And that's the end of that article. I have to say something here because I think it's very interesting that this guy, his name is Ben Yosef, and the Messiah has two names, Messiah Ben Yosef, which is the suffering servant. So this guy has Ben Yosef, like the suffering servant, as his name. And but the Messiah is coming as Messiah ben David, the son of David. So he's coming like a lion roaring out of Zion. So anyway, just interesting how there's just so much biblical proof. You know, there's the Hezekiah seal. There's the people that put the prophet Jeremiah down in the mire of the cistern. Pashur, I think his name was. They convicted him and put him in this miry pit and left him there to die. They found his bulla, his seal with his name on it, plus the other man that was with him, and in that deed. There's just so much proof. And then there's the stela that speaks about the house of David. Now, you wouldn't have it called the house of David if it wasn't a mighty kingdom. So all of that leads to the fact that the Messiah is the mighty and great King of Kings and Lord of Lords, which these people want to deny. So I just wanted to discuss this, and I was really sad to read that Dr. Eilat Mazar has passed away. I had really hoped to be able to meet her one day because she was basically into the Bible and researching things to excavate. And she found many, many objects proving the Bible. And also, one day the Lord was showing me about a stone structure somewhere on the edge of the city of David, and I sent the information to her. It wasn't very long after that she discovered the stepstone structure. So whether that had anything to do with it, I don't know. Whether she went there to look at it, I don't know. But to this day, I'll always wonder. And I had been doing research in the library and sent information to Israel, to her specifically. So I don't know. I never got a reply. And I really believe that God was at work revealing these things for our time. And I don't want to diminish her work in any way, shape, or form because she's a great archaeologist in Israel. And her loss is really just a really great loss. I'm sorry that I never got to meet her or work with her, or it's just really a big loss in the archaeology world. But anyway, let's just keep our eyes on the fact that there is a great kingdom of Judah that's going to return, the return of the Davidic dynasty, and it's going to be the greatest kingdom that ever ruled on this earth. And the Messiah, son of David, is going to rule for 1,000 years. Messiah ben David, the son of David. Shalom. Thanks for watching. God bless you.